All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jaclyn Reifeiss. I am a biotech here at the Coastal Delaware National Wildlife Refuge complex. And today I'm going to be giving you more of a site-specific example of a marsh migration project. While Bart gave us that great overview, we're going to get into the details of a project at Prime Hook and Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuges. So in case you're not familiar, the Coastal Delaware complex is made up of Prime Hook and Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuges. A year ago, we were awarded a grant by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to investigate strategies for facilitating marsh migration through management and implementing management and monitoring marsh migration at both of these refuges. And so we have two study sites. These were determined to be good sites based on the relevance to salt marsh sparrows, as well as through SLAM modeling. One of our sites is at Prime Hook, and this is known as Unit 2. The other site is Bombay Hook, known as Steamboat Landing. And while this wasn't as straightforward, while we were in the midst of the project for each site, we developed hypotheses, developed a way to collect data to address these hypotheses, and then also went forward with decision making based on the collected data. And I want to really emphasize this method for going forward with the marsh migration project, which is data-driven for implementation. And so we'll first start off with Prime Hook, Unit 2. So this was previously a impounded freshwater marsh. It suffered tree and vegetation death after shoreline breaches in 2008. And then a large-scale restoration project recreated tidal marsh, as Bart talked about in his talk. So we're now left with 200 acres of salt marsh adjacent to ghost forest, forested upland, and quite a bit of Phragmites across this site. And so we want to address this essential question. What is preventing marsh migration, and why does it need facilitation at this specific site? And so we developed some hypotheses around why marsh migration might not already be occurring at this site. That first one was that a road is preventing saltwater inundation. So you can see at this site, there is a hunting access road that we believe to be a slightly higher elevation than the rest of the site. And we believe that the tidal salt marsh was all to the east of this site, to the northeast, while upland shrub was on the other side of this road. We hypothesized that this was preventing inundation and therefore was interfering with the natural marsh migration process. We also knew this history of pretty pervasive Phragmites at this site. And so we hypothesized that Phragmites might be outcompeting native salt marsh vegetation, particularly within that migration corridor. And so we addressed these hypotheses with two methods of data collection, one being elevation surveys and one being vegetation plots. So for elevation surveys, we collected RTK points, so measuring the elevation, the surface elevation across the site. And for each RTK point we collected, we recorded the surface type. And so we recorded high marsh, low marsh, Phragmites, and upland shrub based on the predominant vegetation community at that point. And these were collected along transects until they became unnavigable due to pretty dense Phragmites at the site. And after collecting these data, we developed a protocol for collecting vegetation. These were done with 1 by 1 meter quadrats in which we recorded all of the species present and the percent coverage of each species. And these were done on a grid focusing on our priority site, which was stretching from the high marsh and the upland shrub areas. And so using these data, we constructed this general outline of where we saw upland shrub, Phragmites, low marsh, and high marsh. You can see we have a very large area in pink of that high marsh. However, we have an incredible amount of Phragmites at this site. The last time it was sprayed was about 2022. And additionally, one thing we noticed was that upland shrub was before we reached the road or where we predicted there to be a higher elevation. So this indicated to us that it might not be the road that is preventing marsh migration. And after examining a digital elevation model, we do see that that road, in fact, is not providing a super big impediment to marsh migration, nor is there any kind of major slope across the site. There's no more than, I think, 20 centimeters of elevation across 200 acres. And so that leaves us with our second hypothesis that Phragmites is outcompeting native salt marsh vegetation. And what we see from our data is that Phragmites and Spartina patens are occurring at the same elevation. There's not a significant difference in the elevation at which we find these two species. And for reference, Spartina patens is one of our most common high marsh species. And because we see Phragmites where we might otherwise predict high marsh to be present, particularly in between the upland shrub and the low marsh, we believe that this is taking up space within that migration corridor and therefore preventing a marsh migration at the site. And so our proposed management actions from these data are Phragmites treatment and then seeding or plugs in order to stabilize the marsh surface. But we still do have some questions about the hydrology of this site, namely, is it suitable for high marsh vegetation inland of the current high marsh? And how might the hydrology change after treatment? And so we've installed 6 groundwater wells shown with those yellow stars, and we plan on installing soil moisture sensors at our site shown in those blue teardrops. And switching gears to our other site, this is at Bombay Hook, and it's known as Steamboat Landing. So this is comprised of 65 acres of tidal salt marsh, and its adjacent upland vegetation. So you can see in this darker green, this is where we have a really thick stand of bayberry and other upland tree species. These were former agricultural fields, where when farming ceased in 2010, it grew back as very thick bayberry, which is now dominating those fields. And so our site of interest was this little triangular part that you can see on the site, where we would like to facilitate migration and remove that bayberry. So our hypotheses regarding this site and why migration wasn't already occurring are that a berm was preventing saltwater inundation from previous agriculture, and bayberry was outcompeting native salt marsh vegetation even where there wasn't this berm present. And so we use the same data collection methods here at this site as we did at Prime Hook. This was the first site that we looked at, and so we did a little bit of overkill with our elevation data. And then you can see our vegetation plots are arranged a little strangely, but this was to get an idea of the community composition of the high marsh just inside of the upland shrub, and then also on mowed paths through that upland shrub, so we could see what high marsh species might be colonizing those mowed paths. However, we didn't see any high marsh species colonizing underneath any of the upland shrub or on the paths. And this becomes apparent whenever we factor in elevation. So the elevation at which Spartina patens was occurring was significantly different from all of our other most common high marsh species. And I want to point out bayberry and patens were about 20 centimeters different in their average elevation they were sited at. And after analyzing a digital elevation model, this becomes a little more clear. So we can see that there's actually a slope throughout the entirety of that focal site. So there might have once been a berm, but it's degraded and it's allowing for inundation until we see the clear difference in bayberry where there begins to start a sharp slope, and there's actually a whole meter of elevation increase across the site. And so we determined that due to this incredibly high elevation, the site was not suitable within the timeframe of the project. The management required for success would include mowing for definitely over 15 years or grading of the entire area. And so we don't have those resources required for success. And so our recommendations for our future marsh migrators, you guys, We urge you to consider both anthropogenic and ecological barriers to marsh migration. We oftentimes think only of berms or infrastructure, but vegetation communities can cause that barrier. Develop site assessments based on site-specific hypotheses, and also seek perspectives from land managers to ensure long-term feasibility. We developed our plans based on conversations with maintenance about what would actually be possible for the long term on these projects. And finally, feel free to contact us about this project. We love talking about it, and thank you so much to all of our partners involved.